Being an artist can be a heck of a ride, but you're not alone. On Journey of the Art, we tell inspiring stories of artists and chat with those who support us on this path. I'm your host, Lola Opatayo, writer, editor, singer, and all-round lover of words. Come with me on the journey. Hello there, and welcome once again to Journey of the Art. In this episode, I'm joined by a renowned scholar to discuss a cocktail of things: poetry, translation, feminism, and scholarship. It's going to be a remarkable conversation, so I hope you stick around to the end. My guest today is Radha Chakravarty, poet, critic, and translator based in Delhi, India. She was Professor of Comparative Literature and Translation Studies at Dr. B.R. Ambedkar University, Delhi, and she's published 23 books, including Tagore translations like The Essential Tagore and Gora, as well as other translations like Bankim Chandra Chatterjee's Kapil Kundala and Mahasweta Devi's Arasantiniketan. Radha has been nominated for several awards, including the 2011 Book of the Year Award by Martha Nussbaum and the 2004 Crossword Translation. She contributed to Pandemic, a worldwide community poem, which was nominated for the 2020 Pushcart Prize. Radha has edited anthologies including Body Maps, Stories by South Asian Women, and Writing Feminism, South Asian Voices. Subliminal, her debut volume of poems, was named one of the best books from South Asia in 2024 by the journal Ars Notoria. And with that, I'll say, welcome, Radha.
Thank you. Looking forward to our conversation.
Yes, I'm looking forward to it as well. And that's probably the longest bio I've read on the show, but it's because you've done such inspiring work, and I really look forward to all the things that we'll get into today.
Thank you.
Well, before we start the conversation, if you don't know, you can find Journey of the Art wherever you get your podcasts. So check us out on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and other platforms to listen on the go, follow the show, and leave a comment. This really helps to boost our visibility so more folks can discover us and join the community. Also, as always, I'd love to connect with you on Instagram, so please follow the show Journey of the Art pod on Instagram. Okay, Radha, I think it's important to preface this conversation with your work as a translator, because it takes a special kind of dedication to truly understand a writer's work and rewrite it in a way that honors the original. And so, in a way, you're like a bridge, creating a path that new audiences can cross over to encounter Indigenous work. So what inspired your work in translation?
Well, I think there was always translation around me because here in India, all of us are multilingual. My mother tongue is Bengali, but I live outside Bengal in Delhi. So at home, the family spoke Bengali. Others around me were speaking Hindi. In school,
Right.
I was studying in English. And I was hearing all these languages around me. And it wasn't just books, it was music, it was conversation, it was performance. So languages were around me, and I think I absorbed them like a sponge. And I think when communicating, one was anyway mentally translating all the time across these languages in one's head. But the first push, I think, came from my grandfather, who asked me to sit with him, and he was working on some translations of his own work, and he wanted to know what's the Hindi word for this, or and so on, and I got drawn into that. And then it happened purely by accident many years later that I was at that time in Israel. I happened to be married to a diplomat, so I traveled a lot. And there, a colleague and friend, a historian there, she was researching the image of a scorpion in ancient Indian sculptures at a particular site in India. And she also connected it with the Bollywood Hindi film song, which is a kind of folksy song about the image of the scorpion and what it means. And she
Right.
said, "Can you tell me what this song means?" And I ended up translating it in full meter and rhyme, the whole song, instead of just giving
Wow.
her the gist of it. And she then published my translation in her essay in an academic journal. So that became my first published translation. But I
Mm,
began to think of myself as a translator afterwards when a former professor and colleague pushed me into translating Tagore, and she called me
mm,
up and said, "I think you should be translating Tagore." And likewise, a friend who was a publisher drew me into publishing
mm,
contemporary writing from India and Bangladesh, putting the two Bengals together on the
mm.
page, as it were. So I think others saw in me possibilities that I had
Right.
not detected myself.
Right. That's amazing. And I really love what you said about the languages being all around you, and
Yes.
somehow it's almost as if the opportunities found you in a place where you had all these experiences, and when it called forth, you answered. So I really like that. And so I have a question about the mental aspect of immersing yourself in another writer's work. How do you prepare yourself to do this work?
It actually involves more than just working from your head. I think your heart and all your sensibilities are involved.
Mm,
And I think a translator has to be a book's most intimate reader in order
mm,
to translate. I think you really have to immerse yourself in the work. And when you're trying to translate, you have to, I think, try and get into the skin of the original writer and try and feel the book or the work that you're translating
right.
before you can put words on the page. So it's actually, I feel, a kind of double voiced text, a translation, where part of it is invoking the original writer's voice, but
Mm,
then speaking through your own voice as well, which has its own
right.
distinctive quality, because
Right.
no two translations of the same text would be the same. So I'm
Absolutely.
sure that a lot of myself goes into reworking a text in a different language.
Right. And is there any fear that you may not interpret a work as well as maybe the author would have liked? How do you manage that aspect?
Always. So it's an adventure, and in
Mm,
some ways, a very bold step to take to rewrite something that was originally someone else's. And the
right,
only way you can do that is to understand the importance of what you're doing. And there's a kind of risk taking involved. And as I said, it's an act of courage to
right,
take on someone else's text and try and make it your own. But
right,
when you understand that you are a very important medium, as you said, you're a bridge across cultures, across people, and
right,
the text calls to you with a certain urgency that it needs to be known and read by more people and a different set of people,
right,
then you take the plunge and you do the best you can.
right. And so, how do you handle criticism? Because sometimes you do the best that you can, but people, especially the keepers of a language or people who consider themselves to be the keepers of a language, would, find fault with what you've done and say, well, you shouldn't have translated it this way. We wouldn't use this word. Or maybe you've inserted a little too much of yourself into this translation. How do you handle that?
You have to deal with it, I think, by explaining that a translation can never be a mirror image or an exact replica or copy of the original.
Hmm.
I assert that the translation becomes an original work in its own right, no
Right,
doubt born of the earlier work, but it acquires an independent identity of its own, and it
right,
goes out to a different readership who will receive that uh, translated work through their own sensibilities and their own
right,
conditioning. So it can never be identical, and I don't think one attempts to make a carbon copy. I
hmm,
think one tries to bring alive the spirit of the original
right.
in another language and bring the spirit alive rather than a word by word kind of fixed and dead process.
Right. I appreciate that. I really do. And I think that that is so crucial because I also come from a culture that is multilingual.
Yes,
And sometimes there is this concern that the authenticity of the original has been eroded upon in the process of translation. And there's this
always.
wanting to hold on to the indigenous version of it, which is,
Yes,
well, it sounds noble, but for posterity's sake, the beauty of that indigenous gift is being covered up. So I really do appreciate you highlighting the importance of courage and also
yes,
approaching that work with the mindset that this is not going to be a word for word thing, that this is going to be
absolutely.
honoring this work as best as I can.
Yes.
So I want to ask you about how much impact these great writers have had on your own work, because like you said, it requires you going under the skin of the original writer, and I imagine it to be an immersive experience. And you've done that for Tagore, you've done that for a couple of other people, or maybe more than a couple of other people. When it comes time to write your own work, how are you able to, is it actually possible for you to distance yourself from all these, I would say, spirits? Or do you sort of hear them on your shoulder telling you, go this way and go that way? How does that work for you?
That's a very good question because I think when you are translating, you are also inspired by the writers of the
Right,
original works, and they are with you all the time, and you're hearing their voices in your head. But when you write your own work, I think influences are inevitable. I think that's a part of how literary history progresses. Works don't stand in isolation.
right,
And yes, definitely you hear voices, and there's this feeling that you should be writing this way or that way. But I think what distinguishes your own work from that of others is the distinctiveness and uniqueness of your own experience and your
right,
own being in your world and your time. So, I mean, I am not living in Tagore's time and I'm not living his life.
right,
And it would sound very archaic to try and write like Tagore, even though
right,
I think what comes through perhaps is an awareness of the things, the way he saw the world, the way he responded to certain things. I think one's own responses to experience sometimes get fine tuned or
right,
filtered through, well, the experience of reading. Books act
right,
as kind of filters through which you rethink your own experiences,
right,
and the language is your use of language somewhere
right,
acquires shades of what you have read, and I don't think you can be a writer without being a reader.
right.
But having said that, I think when one writes one's original work, which in my case is poetry, and I write a lot of criticism, which is really my thoughts on somebody's
Mm,
book, then your thoughts are your own thoughts, and your
yeah,
emotions and experiences are your own. And you have to try and achieve that authenticity
yeah,
for your work to have its own distinctive flavor and quality.
yeah, yeah,
And you're speaking to a different readership. Your readership is different. So I
absolutely.
think I think we all write with readers in mind, unless we're writing a diary or a journal.
Yes, I really like what you said about, and I guess this is where I was really going with that question, is seeing the world the way these writers saw the world and how it gives you perspective to be able to see your own current world, through their
Yes.
eyes and sort of your eyes as well. But thank you very much for sharing that response. So I'm always curious about what sustains artists, especially when they're notable ones, like Tagore and all these other people we've mentioned. If you could identify a distinguishing factor among these artists whose works you've chosen to translate, what would you say that is?
I think one chooses to translate works that speak to our times and acquire a certain urgency within our settings and our scenarios.
Right.
And Tagore is one such writer. he was able to rise. He was a man of his own times, but he, in
Right.
many ways, ahead of his own times. And he spoke for all of humanity, even as he spoke of the tiniest dewdrop on a leaf. But he was speaking of the world and of the universe, and placing his perspective within that vast canvas.
Right.
And that is why his works have survived, and survived very much through translation across the decades. In fact, he himself won the Nobel Prize. He was Asia's first Nobel laureate, but it was for his own self translations. Gitanjali, he wrote the poems in Bengali and later reworked them in English. They were different from the original, but it was for his writings in English, ironically,
Right.
that he won the Nobel Prize, because he was speaking to a bigger audience through that language.
Right.
So yes, one understands, and one reads, and it influences you, but ultimately it's your own experiences and your own sensibility. And I think it's
Yeah.
your own language. You find your own language, your
Right.
own way of expressing yourself.
Right. I appreciate what you said about writing for humanity and how that can be the thing that cuts across several generations. Because if I pick up one of Shakespeare's plays, or I pick up a
Yes.
book written by Oscar Wilde, or anybody else for that matter, I guess the thing that keeps me interested in that work is how does this speak to my humanity now?
Yes.
And I really do appreciate you highlighting that.
Right.
All right, let's get into your latest work, Subliminal.
Yes.
And I know that you would love to read a portion of it for us.
Well, maybe it's a collection of poems, so maybe I could read
Yes,
just one a small poem, the one that is the opening poem in this collection,
absolutely.
and it's called Memories of Loss. So I'll just read it.
That's fine.
Memories of Loss. In a seashell held to the ear, the murmur of a distant ocean. In the veins of a fallen leaf, the hint of a lost green spring. In the hiss of logs in the fire, the sigh of the breeze in vanished trees. In the butterfly's bold, bright wings, the trace of silken cocoon dreams. In the cracked, parched earth, the yearning for a lost monsoon. In the filigreed finesse of ivory, the agony of a dying elephant. In the fragrant phial of musk, the bottled anguish of a deer. In the sheen of a marble floor, the heartbreak of a mountain rock. In the pressed flower between the pages, the story of you and me.
Oh, that is so beautiful.
So
That
that's
is
my book,
so
Subliminal.
beautiful.
Thank you so
It
much.
reminds me so much of my conversation with Janaki Ray, who's our
Yes,
mutual contact, and
it's a young friend of mine, yes.
she wrote a poem and read it on the show, and I was just taken away by the beauty of it. And I see that beauty in your work as well. I think,
Thank you so much.
I mean, this is probably a biased comment, but I think there's something really beautiful about Indian poetry that the world needs to know. So thank you for sharing your gifts.
Thank you for asking me to read it. I love reading my poems
And you
because,
did it so beautifully. I could
thank
listen
you.
to that. I could just listen to that and drive to work. It's just beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so
So I
much.
want us to start talking about this book by highlighting something that you wrote in the acknowledgements. And you talked about starting the collection during the pandemic when you felt a strong sense of connection with poets from across the globe and
Yes.
poetry offering a space where experiences and emotions could converge.
Yes,
Can you
indeed.
share a bit more about the impact of community on art history, specifically as it relates to your writing this project?
Yes, the pandemic indeed, made me feel simultaneously isolated
Mm,
from everyone and at the same time connected with the whole world because the whole world was affected by it. So
right.
we were all alone, each with our own experience of the pandemic, and yet there was something that the whole of humanity was experiencing.
Right.
And it was an extraordinary, life transforming experience for many of us. And I think my pandemic poetry came from there. And clearly, poets were reaching out to each other because that's a time when a lot of creativity happened, a lot of
Right.
communication happened through words, which when we couldn't see each other face to face, but we knew there were all these people out there
Right.
going through the same crisis, which was collective and individual at the same time. So my pandemic poems came out of that, and they found homes in anthologies published in different parts of the world,
Mm.
including Dubai, including Kenya, including different places. And it was amazing to see my poems there alongside the work of so many people I didn't know, and yet I felt I got to know them through their work. And the most extraordinary experience was being invited to contribute to this worldwide community poem, where more than 200 poets from so many countries contributed short lines,
Mm.
and those were woven together into a single poem
Wow.
where each line stood out. It was different, and yet they all spoke of a collective experience. And one felt so connected, and reading that poem, one felt the anguish of all the people who were
Right.
writing, and one didn't know them, one would never meet them, but we were all there on the same
Right.
page. It was an amazing experience in connectivity at a time when we were in isolation. And it was a profound experience. And at the end, it was nominated for the Pushcart Prize, but that was just, the cherry on the cake. It was not on anyone's mind when we were
Right.
writing these lines. And even now, I get goosebumps when I remember how
Right.
uh, how the pandemic spun out for many of us. So
Mm.
it was a life-changing experience living through that.
Yeah, that's a very moving response. As a writer myself, I can only imagine the, I guess, sense of belonging that you would have felt. Being able to process, actually, first of
Yes,
all, your feelings during the pandemic, and then being able to contribute your processing of it to something that
yes,
now
indeed.
became bigger than you or anyone who was involved in the project.
Yes,
So
yes.
thank you for sharing that, and I'm glad that this became the spark that started your latest work. So I want to really start to zoom in into this collection and by starting with the poem The Key. And the speaker talks about shedding disguise and seeing with new eyes. So it's been 5 years since the pandemic, and although we're not wearing masks anymore, the world seems to be facing a new challenge or new challenges of economic uncertainty. Would you
Yes,
say that this situation presents another opportunity for us to see with new eyes?
absolutely. I think the world is in crisis in a very, very distressing way. And it's, I think, time for us to again pause and take stock. The
Right.
difference is that during the pandemic, we had the time to reflect,
Mm.
and we were forced to reflect. And to kind of try and make sense of this encounter with an unforeseen and
Right.
unprecedented experience. What is happening now is that we are all busy with our own individual
Right.
lives, and we are not getting the big picture, is what I feel. And we're all somewhere deep down very anxious about many things that are
Yes.
going on. But I don't think we are processing it enough
Yes.
and in full depth. And I think literature is a space, writing is a space where such reflection can happen. And because writing is a way of reaching out, I mean, if it's writing that is published and circulated,
Hmm.
I think it can be a way of making others reflect as well, so that in drawing people together into kind of collective reflection on
Right.
what we can do instead of simply complaining about the
Right.
state of the world. So I think literature can be a very important agent of change, self discovery, first of all, but beyond
Right.
that, communication, reaching out, and, in times of crisis. it can not only sustain us but help us perhaps to move things in a certain direction.
I totally agree with you.
Words have great power. Words have
Yeah.
great,
Yeah.
and they can be used and misused. So, and this is also a
Yes.
time when a lot of words are misused,
Yes.
especially in the media. So I think
Yes.
literature can act as a very important balancing factor, and writers, I think, have a great responsibility in that
Yes.
direction.
Yes. I agree that we have great responsibility. And I also hear what you're saying about the fact that we have this great responsibility, but we don't have the space to stop and reflect. We're dousing these fires in our own personal lives and countries and cities while attempting to process what's going on and being
Yes.
required to fashion a way forward. And so you may not have answers to this or an answer to this, but I'm wondering if you see a path forward for us if we don't have the space to stop and reflect because we're busy even trying to process this. And as you said, words are in this time being used, being weaponized. Words are being weaponized. If we're going to provide a solution that's heralded by words, the same thing that's being used to weaponize, how do we navigate that? How do we provide a solution with the same tool that's being used to weaponize people and without the space to be able to stop and reflect?
Here, there are no easy answers to this because I think there are many individuals who are reflecting, who are writing, who are expressing their anxiety and anguish and so on.
Right.
But something more systemic than that is needed for those words to go out there. And this brings me to this whole question of publishing. What
Mm.
gets published, what gets circulated, who publishes it, who reads it, where does it
Right.
circulate? There's a market out there. Very often, all these things are market driven,
Right.
and so very often these things are beyond individual writers' capacity, and there seems to be the need for a wider awareness,
Yes.
and there has to be support for words of the kind that we are talking about.
Yes.
And that again, now we're not just talking print media, we're talking digital media, we're talking AI, we're talking, things that go beyond the human and
Yes.
with untapped potential for good or harm. And at such times, one does think about the need for a collective awareness of
Mm.
where we are going with things. And there has to be, I think, a systemic approach to this for it to really take off.
Right.
And I don't honestly have an answer for this. I just feel the gap there between what
Right.
individuals are feeling and what sometimes even technology and the market are doing to the
Right.
domain of words and the domain of creativity.
Right. I really love your answer, even though you express the fact that you don't have an easy answer for this, but I really love what you said about the fact that we need to adopt a systemic approach to this, and in a way, it goes against the artistic nature. The artistic nature tends to be spontaneous, right? And it tends to flow with the way the artist is feeling in the moment. But what you're saying is this is the time more than ever before that we stop and we take some time to be strategic. How do we get the words out there in an environment where the market probably wants something else, but the world needs something else? So, yes, no easy answers, but I think you've provided a first step for us to consider taking, and that is to be strategic and put some systems in place.
And I think talk to each other more and,
Yes,
and not be alone with thoughts because I think there has to be a sense of a collective awareness, which
yes,
at the moment I think isn't there, not enough of it is there.
yeah.
Many questions, but I don't
That's a,
see it really
yeah,
leading anywhere very concrete.
yeah. I'm stopping. I'm not the interviewer, but I'm stopping to think about what you're saying and
Mhm.
really processing it about we need to have conversations as artists, and not just conversations about how do I make money, but how do we use our gifts. And I know this is a a really dicey subject because there's a school of thought that supports the belief that artists shouldn't be superheroes of any kind and not be tied to societal guidance or societal, not be tied to any kind of leaning where we're trying to provide solutions. But I don't know. I don't know the answers to this, but I will ruminate on what you've said because I think you raised some very interesting points about the kind of conversations that we need to be having as artists.
Yes, absolutely. And I think the fact that you have this platform where you are talking to people from different places, practicing different kinds of writing, it's a very important instance of the kind of conversations that can happen because it's not just you and me talking, there'll be others listening and
Right.
responding. And I think we need to listen more as well. You know,
Yes.
I think
Absolutely.
very often we don't stop to listen.
Absolutely. All right. Let's go to another poem, "The
Mhm.
Severed Tongue,"
Uh,
and it's a poem that pays homage to Kona. I hope I'm saying that correctly.
yes,
And your notes in the poem describe her as a legendary astrologer and poet whose tongue was severed to silence her brilliance.
yes,
But nevertheless, her sayings are still being shared today in India and Bangladesh.
yes.
As a scholar who has researched and written on the subject of feminism, how much progress would you say your community has made in this regard? For instance, I'm curious to know if you also face a kind of silencing even now.
That's a very important question. I think this tension between silencing of different kinds and the need to speak out. And as a woman and as someone who works with words, both as a scholar and as a writer and as a translator, words and silence is actually very central to one's awareness.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Definitely, I think not just in our own society, but I see across the world. And my research on women writers from different locations in the world, that was the subject of my doctoral thesis. I
Yeah.
did a cross-cultural study of contemporary women writers, two of whom were from India, but one wrote in English, one writes in English, and the other wrote in Bengali, and the others were from different continents. I worked on Doris Lessing, Margaret Atwood, Buchi Emecheta, Toni Morrison, Mahashweta Devi, and Anita Desai. Six very different women writers, and I looked at their take on women and society, women and literature, and I focused in particular on their representations of motherhood, of
Mm.
representations of the body, representations of love and relationships, and I realized both how different societies in different ways have repressed women, but how women from time to time have always spoken out, and how literature and the creative arts have always provided an alternative space
Right.
where a woman could articulate her questioning of many things that are happening. So this came through from my own research, and it fed into some of my poetry and the kind of things I've chosen to translate.
Mm.
Many of my translations are translations of women writers.
Right.
I have a book called Vermilion Clouds, which has 100 years of stories by Bengali women.
Mm.
And you can really see the evolution of women's literature in Bengal through those stories.
Right.
I have edited several anthologies of South Asian writing by women. My anthology, Body Maps, is about women's representations of the body from different South Asian contexts, and it includes, of course, work in translations and very contemporary writings at the time when the book came out. So I have worked a lot with women and literature, and as someone who taught in a women's college for many years before I became a professor in the university, I was also, it was part of my mission to make my students aware of these scenarios, and to see younger students inspired by the literature they were reading, and becoming aware of the world in a different way and of their own potential position in the world in a different way. It was a challenge, but I felt that I was doing something very important, both as a teacher, as a scholar, as a critic, as a translator, and now as a writer. I feel that, many of these strands come together when I talk about women and writing. But everywhere I feel that women and words is a very powerful place
Right.
where there's a lot of potential.
Right. I totally agree, and I'm really blown away by all the dedication that you've put into understanding uh, women's literature, women's philosophy, and doing it so objectively. So I thank you for your work over over however many years you've been doing it,
Thank you.
and thank you for coming to share that. And so it sounds to me like we have made progress. Like things aren't as bad as they were before.
Yeah.
We've made some progress, but there's always more progress to be made.
Yes.
And so thank you for shining that light and continuing to use your voice to advance the ideas of women.
Thank you.
I have a question about the poem Starlight,
Okay.
and I would really love to read it if you don't mind before I then go into my question.
Yes, please.
Okay, so it reads, human history writes itself in ink and blood. Maps and monuments, sacred shrines, flags of victory, chronicles, epics, poetic lines. Light years away, the distant stars look down upon our petty lives. Ancient luster, cold, remote, illuminates our narrow gaze, mocks our vainglorious ways, our vaunted progress, dreams sublime. We celebrate the march of time and dream of immortal fame, but the indifference of constellations shrivels our hubris, humbles our pride. When I read this poem, I stopped and thought. And the reason I did that is because this poem speaks very much to the rat race that is so prevalent in the world that we live in right
Yes.
now. You want to go to university or go to college,
Yes.
graduate, get a good job. If you choose to start a family, you want to do that. You want to buy a nice house, buy a car, change the car when it goes bad, probably live in a bigger house, get promoted. There's never a point where you feel that you are done. It's almost like being a hamster and running on a wheel. And I when I read this poem about the indifference of constellations, it really makes me pause and wonder. And I think, as somebody who's receiving this poem as a reader, it really makes me stop and ask myself, what is the most important thing that will outlive me?
Yeah.
And light years away, the distant stars look down upon our petty lives, our vainglorious ways, our vaunted progress, our dreams sublime. I really think about this idea of what we leave for the generations that will come, that is bigger than us, right?
Yes.
And I was wondering if those were your thoughts as you wrote this. This idea of us thinking outside of ourselves, thinking outside of the things that boost our pride, but creating something that extends a lifeline to the next generation. And I see that very much because I see that rather in the light of all that you've done as a translator, because you've like we said earlier on, you've gotten under the skin of these writers and you've seen their world through their own eyes, and how they were able to separate themselves from the bigger picture of humanity and the importance of the human race. And so I wanted to ask if that was your intent with this poem, and if you wanted to share a bit more about that.
This poem is partly also, it comes from the fact that I'm married to an astrophysicist. He's,
That's a good.
he's a stargazer, and he points out constellations, and
Mm,
and it's a perspective I think that is there in our
Right.
home because one just feels so small and so humble when you look
Mm.
out at the firmament. And I think we are too busy to do that a lot of the time.
Right.
But I think this poem was trying to achieve, it's a short poem,
Yeah.
but it tries to achieve a shift of perspective, a sharp shift in perspective to make us step out of ourselves and see that
Right.
the things that loom large in our narrow perspective,
Right.
in the broader cosmic view, what does it really matter? All these
Yes.
things. And I think it forces you to ponder and reflect about something deeper. And I think
Yes.
that was what I was trying to provoke the reader into doing, because I think most of us don't find the time anymore
Yeah.
to think about perspectives. We just live within the immediate moment.
Yes.
And I think the stars invite us to step out of that. So I
Mm.
think that's what this poem was about. And the way we write our history and the way nowadays the popular media keep reconstructing history, uh,
Right.
you know, um, there is nothing bigger than the TV frame in that. It's
Right.
really something so framed and so limited.
Right.
I think we need to make ourselves step out of that. And I
Right.
felt the urgency of that, I think, when I wrote this poem.
Right. Can I just stop and say that I really love the way you speak?
Yeah,
And I feel that our listeners are going to feel that same way. There's such a sense of calm and poetry, even in the way that you speak. And I just
because
wanted to
that's really,
highlight that and say, that's amazing.
thank you. When it's not aware how one comes across, I just say what I think.
It's really so nice.
But you also sound very serene, and I think there's so much depth to the way you read and the way you think into
Thank you.
things. That's
Thank you.
coming through in your questions very much.
Thank you very much. I do try to honor every guest who comes here
That's lovely.
because I think shows art is a constant sharing of the artist's heart, and that was not an intended alliteration or
Yeah.
whatever the literary device is. But I think that every time an artist creates something, they give away a piece of their heart, and so I try to honor that when I read a person's work, whether it's great or it's not as great as I would have loved it to be. That is the perspective or the space of time that they were in. So I really do try to honor that. So I'm glad that it comes through.
So you're really an engaged reader and you read with a lot of depth and sensitivity, and that comes through, you know.
Thank you. Thank you
Nice.
very much. So we're wrapping up now, and I want to talk about the fact that you're now retired, but you're very busy still. You're a very busy woman, and I want to be like that when I get to your age. I want to be retired, but not quite, like still working and still pouring out from the abundance of all that is within me. And I'm curious, what sort of work are you devoting yourself to these days?
I'm doing all the things that I didn't have time to do before. And reading is one, writing is another. But I love travel. And my husband and I, we made a bucket list of all the places we want to go while we still can. And we're very serious travelers.
Mm,
And, it's a passion. So I find that I don't have to look for, wait for a vacation or use
mm,
up my leave. I'm free to, you know,
yeah,
explore the world, and that's a great heady feeling. And I have time for books, I have time for writing. I am not tied to a schedule. And I
right,
also love gardening. I have not a garden but a courtyard which I've turned into a miniature garden.
right,
And it's my other life. I spend a lot of my time there. And
right.
with plants and trees and sky, and I have the time to dawdle. I
Yeah,
love that. It's a luxury. It's a luxury.
yeah,
So
it is.
I don't think of myself as retired. I say this is a new lease of life. I have a new life.
Yes, that is so beautiful and such a wonderful way to end the show. Um, I'm inspired by you. I'm greatly inspired by you, and this
Thank you.
has been one of my favorite conversations on the
Lovely.
show. I'm so thankful for the wisdom and the depth of insight that you shared with me today. And I really hope that people encounter the beauty of your work. And thank you so very much for all your efforts.
Thank you for your lovely questions and your in-depth interest in my work, because I was able to say many things that happened that I could say because you asked those questions. I loved
Right.
it too. Thank you.
You're very welcome. On the next episode, I'll be chatting with another inspiring artist. But before then, I'd love to hear from you. Tell me what you think about this show and this episode. Feel free to drop me a note here or send me a DM on Instagram at journeyoftheart. Finally, please subscribe if you're watching this on YouTube, or follow and rate the show if you're listening elsewhere. Help me connect with other artists who need a dose of inspiration today. Until next time, stay on the journey of your art.